Rose more confident, more refined, better at hiding harm behind policy language and partial truths. So Clay changed tactics. Instead of attacking the structure head-on, he focused on timing. He waited for moments when controlled damage would no longer be enough, when small admissions would contradict each other, when patched narratives would collapse under their own weight. Because a system that manages truth in pieces eventually forgets what the whole looks like. And when that happens, control slips. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but irreversibly. Everyone expected a whistleblower. That was the mistake. Inside the system, dozens of people saw the warning signs. Analysts flagged anomalies. Engineers noticed patterns that didn't align with official reports. Legal teams raised quiet concerns in carefully worded emails. The truth was visible but fragmented. And fragments are easy to ignore. The system had learned how to silence alarms without shutting them off. Complaints were redirected into review loops. Reports were marked, pending further verification. Meetings were scheduled weeks out, then postponed. No one said no. No one said stop. The whistle didn't sound because it never reached a mouth willing to blow it. Clay studied the psychology behind the silence. Fear wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like professionalism. People told themselves they were being responsible by waiting for more data, more confirmation, more approval. Waiting became compliance. Those closest to the truth assumed someone else would act. Someone higher. Someone braver. Someone with protection. The burden dissolved as it moved upward, until it disappeared entirely. Clay had seen this before. Systems don't collapse because of villains alone. They survive because ordinary people hesitate at the exact moment action is required. And the system rewarded that hesitation. Careers advanced quietly. Bonuses arrived on schedule. Silence was never demanded. It was simply profitable. Speaking up carried risk. Staying quiet carried comfort. So the whistle that could have changed everything stayed unsound. But Clay wasn't waiting for heroes. He understood that depending on conscience was unreliable. Instead, he focused on inevitability, creating conditions where silence itself would become impossible to maintain. Because when truth is structured correctly, it doesn't need a whistleblower. It leaks. It spreads. And eventually, it speaks for itself. Clay never hacked the system the way people expected. There was no dramatic breach, no flashing warnings,